Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me and having me here. I find myself a bit of a fish out of water here. I'm a climate scientist. I'm not a policy maker, so we advise policymakers across the spectrum. And I think I'm probably the only person here who actually works for the US federal government, but I am certainly not here as a representative of the US federal government. Let me just make that very clear. If you want to talk about that, we can talk about it offline later. But I'm a scientist, first and foremost. And we are in a very interesting point scientifically, also geopolitically. And I think that there's some interesting links there. We are at a point where the work that the scientists have done and have been doing for the last 40 years has become, it's become apparent to everybody that what was being said 30, 40 years ago has actually come to pass. The things that we predicted would happen as a consequence of the increases in greenhouse gases have actually happened. We're seeing the large changes in the global mean, but nobody lives on the global mean. And so while it was just in the global average, nobody really paid very much attention. But now the size of the change, and we're approaching 1.5 degrees, means that we are seeing the changes happen at local and regional levels. We are seeing the increases in the heat waves, more intense rainfall, increases in fire, increases in sea level, storm surge, damages. All of these things were predicted and have come to pass. And it's a very odd thing as a scientist, because mostly you would think that scientists would be happy that you've made observations and you've encapsulated that in your physics, and you've made predictions about what was going to happen, and those predictions came true, right? Isn't that great? Isn't that what science is all about? Except that we're all human as well, most of us. And it gives us no joy to have been proven right. And so we are in a situation where we spend a lot of time talking to people because we're still making predictions. We're still making predictions for what's going to happen if we continue to emit at the rate that we are. Even if we continue to emit at the rate that the national determined contributions suggest we will continue to do. Right? We are making predictions for what's going to happen. And what we can predict is that the impacts that we're seeing, even if things slow, the impacts will still increase and accelerate because these things are non-linear, right? They don't just go up in a smooth way. There are thresholds that get crossed, and if I run a subway system and the flooding level is below the level at which the subway gets flooded, there's no damage. But 1 inch above, then massive amounts of damage. And there are thresholds like that across the whole system. And so we can predict that those thresholds are going to be surpassed as long as we continue to emit carbon dioxide for the most part, and methane separately. If we want to minimize that, we have to get to net zero. We've been talking about net zero all the time here, but sometimes I get the impression that people don't understand why we think net zero is so important. If we get to net zero, our best estimates from the science says that global warming will stop. It won't reverse, it will just stabilize. We'll still see some lagging effects with sea level rise, we'll still see some lagging effects with the ice sheets, but effectively all of the things that are affecting the weather, the rainfall, the fires, all of those things will stabilize, right? Which means that we have a position to adapt, right? We cannot adapt to a constantly changing, accelerating change. Right? And so if we need to, if we want to be in a situation where we can adapt to the changes that have already happened, we need to get to net zero as soon as possible. And every 1/10 of a degree matters. I was never very confident that we would stay below 1.5 degrees. Obviously, we are not going to stay below 1.5 degrees, but we have the possibility of staying below 3. We have the possibility of staying below 2.5. We have the possibility of staying below 2, depending on how fast these transitions happen. The faster the transitions happen, the faster we get to net zero, the smaller the changes and the impacts will be. And the science is super clear. right? It's not that we know everything. We don't know everything. We still have biases in the models. We still have work to do that's going to involve machine learning. We still have work to do that involves better observations, better constraints on the models that we're using for adaptation. And we need to work much, much harder at getting that information to you, right? All of this stuff is locked up in big databases, all of which is public, but it's almost totally inaccessible. We need very much to work on getting information that's salient to decision makers, to you, at where you are. And collectively, we have not done a good job. The governments have not done a good job. The scientists have been focused on different things. But we need people like you to insist to us and to our funders that this is something that you need. And we can, I think, do a much better job at delivering that.
Yeah.
So we are bizarrely proud of the science that we've done. We are terrified of the science and the predictions that we are making, and we have to keep talking in order to get past the blockages towards a truly net zero future.
Super, thank you very much indeed for that. A great piece of advocacy, which we need. Apropos of nothing in particular, how well funded is the American Geophysical Union and American Association for the Advancement of Science, and how confident are you that that funding is going to stay in place?
Those are, they're not funded agencies. You should be asking more how much the federal government is funding climate research in general and earth science in general. NASA spends about $2 billion a year on earth science. There's another $1 billion or so at NOAA, DOE, and the like. And the budget is nobody knows what the budget is. And we're already in the new financial year, and half the people who would be working on this have been furloughed. They're not working. They're just supposed to be sitting at home.
Yeah.
And the money that has been released or has been slated to be available for FY26 is roughly a 50% cut to science funding in general. And for climate modeling particularly, it's about an 80% cut. Now, that's not the final budget, and the budget process in the United States is both psychotic and extremely dysfunctional, and so you don't really know what's going to happen. But it is, that's the baseline. Now, the Senate and House budgets are much more favorable, but they are not yet law.
Okay. I mean, I ask for very obvious reasons, but, it's a general point that if the Ys, of which we're thankfully very well stocked, are giving us information that we find persuasive and that's comprehensive, but the powerful decline to pay any attention to it, that's a problem in itself. And,
yes.
and no amount of, all it demonstrates, in I hate to be pessimistic, but all it demonstrates in a sense is that an advocacy doesn't work. It's not, the gears aren't connecting. Somewhere there's a leakage of information and of trust. And I don't know what the answer to that is.
I mean, there's a general reduction of trust in institutions,
Yeah.
some of which is justified, some of which is not, some of which is stoked by paranoid conspiracy theorists. But I think what one needs to think of the US as much more than just the federal government, right? The federal government in America is much weaker than the executive branches in most European countries. And there are a lot of things that are happening at the state levels that cover more than half of the population of the US that are much, much more positive and doing a lot more. New York State, California, Oregon, Washington State, most of the Northeast.
Okay.
And the places that are doing really well in terms of renewable are places in the middle of the country. Texas, North Dakota are the leaders in wind and solar. So,
Yeah. Perhaps one of the ironies is that in the midst of this tone from the top, which is almost entirely, drill, baby, drill, and don't look at the climate hoax, in the midst of this, there's a population that really is acting according to a different set of principles, which is optimistic.
There's a lot of performative stuff that's going on that is not real, and one should focus very much on what's actually happening on the ground.
Okay.